in a larger way, as in. Hello.
Yeah, you can continue, Fayiza.
Okay, so I was saying we all know what impact this could have on our lives as Muslim women. We know how we are being pushed out of educational institutions, out of public spaces, and um, how this is benefiting a certain idea of Muslim women, and how this is also, we all know how Muslim women in public spaces have actually challenged this whole notion of oppressed Muslim women, or Muslim women who is the victim of all these patriarchy and stuff like that. And also it also further criminalizes Muslim men. So this whole idea was in a way challenged when Muslim women started appearing in public spaces, when Muslim women started talking, speaking for themselves. And so the important question that we should ask regarding this whole hijab ban is that who is benefiting from this whole discussion and debate on should hijab be banned and all that? Who is benefiting from it? We all know that in the periphery itself, when we look at it, we know Muslim women are not in any way benefiting from it, and it's also very visible. Like we know, according to a report that came out in August, about 16% of young Muslim girls have dropped out of colleges after this ban happened. So this is not, and even the Supreme Court judge, I think Sudhanshu Dhulia, he pointed out, he makes an important point. He asks, are we making her life any better? And it's very visible that we are, and this verdict or this whole discussion that is happening, it is not in any way making our lives as Muslim women, our lives any better. So who is this benefiting? And also we know this whole debate has happened for no reason at all, because when this I think this happened in 2021 June, when Udupi College set out guidelines for I think guidelines banning hijab. So when this happened, the students themselves have said that their classmates did not have a problem with them wearing a hijab, and we even saw pictures where their classmates were holding their hands and accompanying them to classes. So this was not a problem for the students, or this was not a problem, this was not a discussion, but suddenly this became a discussion. And then suddenly the country became so intolerant. The country had suspicions about Muslim women in headscarf sitting next to you, and suddenly they became a little skeptical of Muslim women. So why? And also it is also important that, so this discussion is happening in the first place, but it is also being enabled. Like we know now the whole protest in Iran is happening, and we know how this whole group of liberal feminists in India, how they're reacting to the protests in Iran. They're all like they need women to come out, and they're speaking about women's rights and all of that. But then in their own country, so many young women, that too from very humble backgrounds, these women are being kept out of educational institutions. They are being kept out of, they're being denied their dreams, denied their very basic right. We all know education is a very basic right, and it opens doors to many other, to a better a decent life, to a lot of empowerment. So all of these are being snatched away from young girls, young girls from poor backgrounds, and they don't even care. But then they have to talk about women in Iran and how they're being oppressed and all of that. And so that is in a way enabling this whole discussion to happen. That is in a way enabling this whole blatant injustice to happen. And also I think Sharukh ma'am will elaborate on the whole legal side of the this whole debate and the Supreme Court debates that has happened regarding the case. But as a I don't know much about the legal side of it, but still when you follow up the discussions that happened in the Supreme Court, I find it very amusing to actually they're discussing the future of young girls in this country, and I find it pretty um, I find it very funny and very irresponsible, because I think Shahrukh Alam ma'am has pointed out in one of the opinion pieces she wrote for the leaflet. I think it is the focus is now. I'm quoting her. So she says the focus has now shifted to what rights these restrictions might breach and whether these rights are appropriate in the first place. So the whole discussion that has happened in the court is about they know that these rights will be taken away, as in like these rights will be breached. So they are actually discussing whether these rights are appropriate, as in like this whole discussion on whether hijab is an essential part of Islam and all of that. It is, as the judge himself has pointed out, it is not essential for this debate, because these young women are being kept out of educational spaces. So um, the judiciary should be concerned more about these young women of the country not being educated. They are being uh, they're not being granted a decent way of life. So that is what the judiciary should be concerned about. The judiciary is rather concerned about a problem that is not even there. Nobody is being threatened when somebody in their class is wearing hijab. No complaints like that has ever come out. So this whole debate, we know, when we look at it, as Muslim women, we can clearly see that why is this debate happening right now, and who is it benefiting from, and why is why is there nobody to speak against it? Why is it okay that about 16% of young women in Karnataka is dropping out of colleges because they're simply being denied their basic right to education, and this whole feminist group in India is not even concerned. So I think it is very important that we have this. I'm not going to speak about it a lot. I think Shahrukh Alam ma'am can enlighten us more on the legal side of this, and also this whole the verdict and the issues related to it. So I think I invite Shahrukh Alam ma'am for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Faiza. And thank you, Tamanna, for having me. I'm two things I disagree with that you said, Faiza. One is that I'm not
Okay.
at all an important guest. I'm here to sort of think with you. I'm going to try, and because it's also called some related thoughts. So these are some thoughts, and hopefully at the end of the discussion, we'll together come to some kind of coherence. That is one. The second,
Can I interrupt you for 2 seconds? I'm
yes.
really sorry about this. I forgot the introduction part. So I am really sorry. I just
No,
went on
there's
talking.
you can introduce me, but there's nothing much to introduce. I'm just
No.
I practice in the Supreme Court and the Delhi High Court and some other high courts. And
Okay.
I've also studied sociology. So a lot of what I say, you'll notice, is coming from a sociological perspective.
Okay.
And I've also worked as a researcher with a theologian in South Africa, Maulana Fayiza CA. So you'll
Okay.
also notice that some of what I say comes from the perspective of liberation theology, right?
Okay.
That's the introduction. I don't need more of an introduction.
All
But so
right.
that's one thing. The second thing that I want to just clarify is that the dispute itself, the dispute around the hijab, is completely unnecessary. I agree with you. And it's a creation of the executive. It's unnecessary. But I don't agree with you where you say that the judiciary is indulging in this unnecessary dispute. I think once this
Okay.
dispute has been created, by the powers that be, by the state, someone has to resolve it. And
Okay.
went to the judiciary, and partly at least, which we see in Justice Dhulia's judgment, there is some resolution. And we'll again have to go back to the judiciary. And the judiciary will again have to give us their time in order to resolve this completely unnecessary debate that has been created by others, right? So just that clarification. I think the
Okay.
judiciary has not created it. The judiciary is hopefully trying to resolve it for us,
Okay.
right? Now let's start from the contentions, the arguments that were made before the Supreme Court while arguing the matter. And Gautam Bhatia has written a very interesting piece in the Hindustan Times. And he says that even within the lawyers who were arguing in favor of the hijab, there were two very different kinds of arguments that were being made. And Gautam Bhatia says that those two arguments, which were being made by the same side in favor of the hijab, were completely opposite. And he even calls them that they're irreconcilable, that they don't reconcile with each other. So let's start from there. He says that the first set was pegged in the argument that to wear the hijab is a religious duty or an essential religious practice. So they were saying that it's mandatory, it's non-optional. If I choose to be a believer, if I choose to be a practicing Muslim, then there's no question of choice. It is an essential religious practice for me. I have to do this. So there were some lawyers who were completely basing their argument in this position, that it's an ERP, essential religious practice, end of matter. The only choice in the matter is whether I want to be a believing Muslim woman or not. Once I decide to be a believing Muslim woman, I have to do this. The second set, who were also arguing in favor of the hijab, were grounding their arguments in what Gautam calls constitutional promises, that the Constitution has made some promises to us as citizens. The Constitution promises me the right to autonomy, the right to choose, and the right to dignity. So therefore, in wearing the hijab, I don't want to get into whether it's mandatory, whether it's a religious duty or not. It is a choice that I'm making. It's an informed choice that I'm making. It's a very deliberate choice that I'm making. And in accusing me and saying that, no, this is not real choice, this is not real agency, you are attacking my dignity. You're basically telling me that I am not smart enough to think for myself. You are telling me that I'm in fact indoctrinated, or you are telling me that I am being forced into doing something and I don't have the courage to publicly state that, and I'm just following through with it, right? But more important, the choice here is not just constitutional choice. Choice here is also the choice as a Muslim woman to engage with your religion very actively, to not treat religion as something that is just handed over to you from high. It's a constant engagement, it's a constant reflection, it's a constant thinking through of what your religion is, right? So these are two different positions being argued from the same side, right? Now, the second position appeals to me personally, the second position being to ground it in ideas of choice, autonomy, dignity, right? Rather than saying that it's mandatory, I don't have a choice. And by grounding it in autonomy and choice and dignity, you are not taking it outside of Islam. You are not saying, leave my religion at home. This is a constitutional right, I will practice it. In fact, you are saying that no, how I practice my religion is also a constant reflection. It's not mechanical, it's not without agency. It's in fact very individualized, and it's a constant process. And it appeals to me for two reasons. Now, look at this frame, look at the video now that we are talking in. There's me on the right, and there's Fayiza on the left. Now, if we were to ground our argument, and there is Tamanna below, if we were to ground our argument in ERP, or religious duty, then am I less of a Muslim than both of you? Is that a fair question to frame? And this is where that question leads us. The question of ERP leads us into situations where religion becomes crystallized. Religion is not anymore an active thinking process. It's a handout, right? So I'd rather be in a position, I'd rather argue from a position where all three of us can be said to be practicing Muslims, believing Muslims, and more than that, thinking Muslims, Muslims who are constantly engaging with religion. And it could be that Tamanna and Faiza are thinking differently and I'm thinking differently, but it doesn't mean that any of us is a better Muslim and some of us are lesser Muslims. So this is from a personal perspective. But the second reason why this argument appeals to me is that I see that very frequently Islam is constructed, the idea of Islam is constructed in the image of some kind of authoritarian, universal, unbending, unflexible Sharia, that this is what it is, and all Muslims follow it without agency, right? That is the idea of an ERP. That is the idea of the Sharia, that this is what it is. And the popular perception is that all Muslims just follow it blindly without thinking. There is no scope for everyday negotiations. There's no scope for interpretations in the everyday life. And it seems to suit, this kind of perception seems to suit both the state, but also the community patriarchs. That the idea that as a community, we have to just stick together, we have to be homogenous, and we have to follow what is handed out to us, right? So on this particular point, I think the state and the community patriarchs often think alike, that it is universal. There is no scope for flexibility once you've been told what it is. But I mentioned to you that I did some work with a liberation theologian in South Africa, Maulana Farid CA. And what I learned from him was that there is, amongst practicing Muslims also, there's a constant need and a constant attempt to engage every day with the Holy Quran, with your faith, with how you practice your faith. And he taught me to read the Quran from the perspective of the most marginalized people in society. He said to me that, of course, a privileged white South African person who's Muslim will read the Quran from his perspective, from his understanding, whereas a Black woman in apartheid South Africa will read the Quran from a very different perspective. She'll look for different answers. And the white South African, the privileged white South African, will ask different questions because your social, political, everyday context has a bearing on how you're reading religion. You'd read emancipation, you'll read equality, you'd read liberation in the Quran if you're reading it from the perspective of the most marginalized. If you're reading it from a perspective of power, then you'll look for justifications for that power. You will not read emancipation necessarily in the Quran. But I also learned in South Africa that apart from a theological study, apart from a liberatory theological study, everyone is constantly engaged with religion. And everyone is constantly asking themselves whether whatever they are doing in life is moral or not moral. Would Allah be pleased or not be pleased? So that's a question that believing Muslims are asking themselves all the time. It's not as if they're just receiving prescriptions from on high, from the Maulvis, from the Maulanas. That's not how it works. But in India, this is the construction of Islam, as opposed to what they call Indian eclectic religions. Indian religions are very eclectic, but Islam is not. Sufism, the liberal idea of Sufism is also very eclectic, but Islam is not. And this whole ERP argument cements that kind of perception, that there is one ERP, everyone has to follow it, it's not open for debate. But the other idea of choice in engaging with religion, choice in interpreting religion, I think subverts that idea. And I think that is something very, very important and very, very interesting. Now I'll take you to another book that I read and I found very interesting. This is a book by Sabah Mahmood called The Politics of Piety. And some of you might be familiar with the book. Sabah Mahmood was basically an anthropologist, and she did a very detailed study. She worked with a Muslim women's group in Cairo, in Egypt. And she asked them about why they had chosen the hijab. And they gave a very interesting answer. They said that, you know, when somebody decides to run the marathon, for instance, you have to run 21 miles, you have to train your body. You can't just get up and start to run the marathon. You have to adopt a particular diet, you have to adopt a particular lifestyle. So they said that when we decide to become more mindful towards God, we have to train our body. And the veil is one such disciplining of the body, because the external disciplining by wearing the veil makes us more mindful. And then the internal self tends more naturally towards God. So she says that it is basically an ERP towards an ERP. It's an essential religious practice of disciplining the body in order to be able to perform the essential religious practices in Islam, which is also interesting. This is also how Sabah Mahmood is thinking about this. But she's also making one other very interesting point. She's saying that in deciding to discipline the body, in deciding to adopt the veil, there is agency. There is immense agency. How is that agency different from a marathoner, from a marathon runner who spends months training their body? Why is one about extreme agency and the other not about agency? Why is one considered a cancellation of agency? Right? Am I with you? If you lose me at any point because of the theoretical nature of the talk, then tell me, and I'll repeat myself with examples, because I want this to be more of a discussion than a lecture. So this is what Sabah Mahmood is saying. But Sabah Mahmood also makes another very interesting point. She says that liberal feminism looks at resistance only in terms of resistance to conservative structures and conservative discourses, right? So you have to be resisting something conservative in order to be treated as a feminist. And on the other hand, Islamist movements think of social protests and resistance only in terms of rejecting the modernist project, or what they call the colonial project or the capitalist project. You reject all of that. But Sabah Mahmood says that this women's group, this in Cairo, was not rejecting structures. Sorry, I apologize for that. I apologize for that. So she's saying that they're not rejecting anything. They're not sort of going out and protesting against some kind of modernity. Neither are they resisting any kind of conservative structure. But what they are doing is they are showing agency by doing very specific acts, like adopting the veil, like going to mosque groups, like sitting together, forming a community of women, discussing their problems. And all of this, these are very small acts. These are everyday acts. But these are acts that display an agency. And she also says that in doing this, when you're doing small things like dressing up in a particular way, or eating in a particular way, or forming a community in a particular way, you are also individualizing it. You are doing it in your own way, and you are experiencing it in your own way. And she says that this experience is also very important because each woman negotiates with her family and with her faith in different ways. She experiences it in different ways, right? So that brings us basically to Article 25(1), because Article 25(1) gives the right to each individual to practice their faith and practices of their religion in their own way. And Justice Dhulia recognizes this. Justice Dhulia says that I don't want to get into what the community considers is essential religious practice. It is enough for me that some girls have come to the court and they have said that this is how I am interpreting my religion. This is how I'm engaging with my religion. This is how I'm experiencing my religion. And he says that that is enough, and that is a right under 25(1), and we must protect that right. Right? So that is one part of it. Let me now jump to another part, and let me talk about how agency and choice is looked upon by the people who oppose the hijab. They say that no, there's no agency here. There's no choice here. Everyone is just forced into it. Their parents forced them into it. Their conservative families forced them into it. Now, on record, what you have are some very strong-willed women who wear the hijab, and they have come to court, and they are saying that we are doing this of our own accord. And yet they say that no women are pushed into it. So where is the evidence for saying that? Where is any kind of data for saying that? It may well be true, but it's not being backed with any kind of research. It's not being backed by any kind of data. It's only being said on the basis of pure prejudice, because what you see in front of you is quite the opposite. We have people like Tamanna who've gone to court and who've said that I am doing it with full agency. I'm doing it with full informed consent. So they'd ignore that, and instead they'll make arguments like, but young girls are having to do this, and this one is having to do that, and we think it's not choice. So that is one thing. But supposing even if it was not free agency, supposing it was, because agency actually is never free. Your socialization is never free. That applies to all your social life, not only to hijab, but who you are, what you wear, where you live, where you work. All of that is conditioned by socialization. They forget that. They only focus on the hijab. But even if we were to take their argument at face value, what are they saying? They are saying hijab is a controlling sort of garment, right? Which polices women's body. So let's replace it with a state-sponsored uniform, which will inculcate discipline. So you basically remove what your families want you to wear, because that's horrible, that's terrible. It's a negation of choice. But you force on people what the state wants you to wear, because that's wonderful. That will inculcate discipline. So that makes no sense. That's ironical. Because if you think that choice is important, which it is, and if you think that families are forcing people into wearing hijabs, then you'd want to educate the girls. You'd want to teach them democracy. You'd want to teach them critical thinking. You'd not want to impose another set of uniform on them and say, this we are doing because we want to inculcate discipline. That's ironical. Now, which brings me to another point, that some arguments have been made about how uniform is an equalizer. When you wear the same uniform and you go to school, then whether you're rich or whether you're poor, because you're wearing the same uniform, there's some degree of equality. But I don't think that this is about equality at all. I don't think that the imposition of hijab in the Karnataka schools and colleges is about equality at all. Because if you were to talk about equality in schools, then you'd start with talking about the lack of access to education for different communities. That would be the first thing on your agenda. You talk about how there are so few public funded schools in Karnataka. You'd actually want to equalize the resources that are given to different schools. You would talk about caste in schools. You would talk about how midday meals in schools are not served to Dalit Dalit students together with other students. You talk about how Dalit children have died because they dared to drink water from a pitcher that was meant for upper caste students. None of that you're worried about. You want to impose hijab, you want to impose uniform as a measure of equality, as a means to homogenize. That really does not ring true. That does not ring true. So what is the purpose of this then? Which is the question Faiza was asking. Why are you doing this? And I would argue that you're doing this only in order to discipline. Because really the establishment of national consciousness, the establishment of nationalism and unity is done by bringing your minorities and your dissidents in line. Nobody can afford to look different. Nobody can afford to be critical. Nobody can afford to criticize. They all need to be brought in line. And in this context, I really think that the only purpose of the hijab, only purpose of the uniform is to discipline, not to equalize. And if you look at certain portions of Justice Gupta's judgment, I'll read out one or two sentences. He says that students should not grow up in any kind of environment of rebellion or defiance. Then he says, students should look alike, feel alike, think alike for a cohesive, cordial atmosphere. This is disciplining of the mind. This is disciplining of how everyone has to think alike. No one can be critical. No one should criticize because that is rebellion or defiance. So again, this is not about equality. This is about discipline. Which brings me to my last point, which is that you also mentioned the example of Iran and what has been happening in Iran. I want to point out that Mahsa Amini, the first woman who was killed by the police in custody for wearing a hijab, was somebody who belonged to the Kurdish minority in Iran. And the Kurdish identity is politically suspect in Iran, right? They are seen to be opposing the Iranian Islamic State. So she was a member of a minority community who was politically suspect. What does that say to you? That the state always endeavors to bring the minorities, and especially those minorities that are seen to be in opposition with the state, in line. They need to be disciplined first of all. And that I hope partially answers Faiza's question, what was the need for this? The need for this is to discipline. But Justice Dhulia has given a way out. Justice Dhulia says that he's obviously against discipline. His whole idea of the school, of education of young people, is that this is the time to explore and this is the time to experiment. Let the students come out with curiosity and let nobody be alarmed by diversity. And then he further says that a good school enables and supports shows of cultural and religious minority, choices of cultural and religious minorities. So he's providing a space that is the opposite of the disciplining space. He's saying, bring in your diversity. We'll enable that diversity. And he's saying, let everyone explore and experiment. Let everyone think critically, right? Now, this is brilliant. This is an endorsement of the need for spaces where everyone can be what they want to be. But as minorities, and as people who need these kind of spaces, and as people who don't want to be disciplined by the homogenizing state, in turn, what duty do we owe to other members of our community, or to other minorities, or to other dissidents? I would submit that we need to cherish this space, but we also need to reproduce this space. We need to give the same spaces within our community, right? We need to speak out against the homogenizing tendencies in the community. We need to tell everyone that it's every individual Muslim's right to engage with religion in the way that they will. And religion as prescription cannot be handed down from on high by the community patriarchs. So we need to cherish this space, and we need to also make sure that this space is provided to others whose choices we may or may not like, right? I'm thinking of sexual minorities. I'm thinking of transgendered people. How would we as Muslim women, as women who want to exercise our choices, react to others who want to also exercise their choices in those same spaces, which we may or may not agree with? So to conclude, this is something to cherish. This is something to build. This is something that is owed to us. But equally, this is something that we owe to others within the community and others who are less powerful than us even. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think we are open to questions now. So if anyone has questions. I think they can either unmute and ask the question, or maybe they can message it here.
There are no questions. Was it too disjointed?
No, I think we can wait for a while. I think it will take a while.
Sure. But even if there are no questions, that's not a problem. This is something to think about together.
Okay, yeah, sure.
I'll make one clarification. I kept talking about how the state likes to discipline minorities. But again, in just saying minorities, I'm also homogenizing. I'm also saying that, all Muslims need to be disciplined by the state. But I actually mean minorities who want to be different, who like to sort of adopt a political identity. They are the ones who sort of diverging from the mainstream, and they are the ones who need to be quickly disciplined. Not all Muslims do that. Some Muslims are very happy being part of the mainstream. Some others are more critical. Some others are more conscious of a particular political identity. And those are the ones that are seen in opposition sometimes. And they are the ones who are seen as politically suspect. And they are the ones who need to be disciplined.
Okay, I think I have a question here.
Yes.
So you talked about how the those who oppose hijab tend to say that there is no, even though these students who are wearing hijab, and they're going to court and they're saying that I need to do this, I need to wear this hijab, and I need to study wearing the hijab. So those who oppose the hijab, they keep saying that these women are being manipulated, they have no agency, choice, and such. So do you think this is also apart from a need to discipline the minority, like you said, isn't it also an extension of what is happening, what is happening in the country right now, this whole criminalizing of Muslims, and this whole don't you think it is an extension of how they want to police the bodies of Muslim women? Like we have
Yeah,
seen
absolutely.
how Muslim,
Absolutely. Yeah, sorry, go on. Sorry.
yeah, so we have seen how uh, these uh, these apps that came out, Bully Buy and Sully Deals, and also there are other engagements in social media, how Muslim women are being cyberbullied, they're being attacked on virtual spaces, they're being, you know, there are verbal abuse going on, and there is a lot of stuff that is happening in the virtual spaces. So even after, this is also a concern and something that I have, maybe this is out of panic or something, but then also something I've viewed after the ban happened, how these women were, you know, how they were filmed, like how women removing hijab were filmed, and that was celebrated. So uh, so I find it like I find it more like a you know, a door to policing Muslim women bodies, more than maybe there is a larger aspect of disciplining the minority, but then maybe it is a part of disciplining the minority. uh, I find this as a way to police Muslim women bodies, and
No,
even though they keep
so
saying that
let
they
me
have
let
agency.
me let me respond. I mean, I'm interrupting you, but I think um,
Okay.
first of all, I think it's not fair to paint everyone who opposes the hijab with the same brush. People oppose the hijab also from many different positions. Like they support the hijab from different positions. They oppose the hijab also for many different reasons, right? Some do it only to bully.
Okay.
Some do it only to
Yeah.
discipline, right? So bullies see, so all of that is one
Yeah. Yeah.
set, but the other set who sort of says that this is not really an informed choice is another set. And
Yeah.
amongst them are people who are on the left, amongst them are people who are liberals who speak up for Muslims, who speak up against the UAP arbitrariness, all of that. But they also sometimes oppose the
Mhm.
hijab. And they are saying that not all women do it as an expression of agency. A lot of women do it as a handed down cultural practice. A lot of young girls are also forced to adopt it just as a cultural practice, as a religious practice, which is true. We can't deny that,
Mm.
right? But we can't also let that prejudice take over the entire argument around dignity and choice and autonomy. So we have to also be more nuanced. We have to admit that this does happen, but hopefully by enabling spaces where all Muslim girls, whether they wear the hijab or not wear the hijab, are given a space to think and reflect and to be critical. Those who want to give it up might have that option to give it up, and those who want to keep it will keep it, right? But I think we can't deny that it's completely uh, of one's own volition, free will and volition. Sometimes it is not, but also sometimes
Yes.
most things are not. That's the point I was making. That you're socialized, right? Nothing is completely pure agency. Everything is contextual, right? But we also have to think about how much contextual and how much direct force. And it's also true that all of us negotiate our lives, right? We all negotiate with family, with employers, with college, with everyone. So this is one of the negotiations. Why are you highlighting and reiterating it as one huge thing, and pulling it out of context and saying this is the worst oppression that can happen? That, to my mind, is not completely true.
Okay.
Somebody is sending me direct messages, and I don't know what they're saying. One says, record Kitto, please. Then they say, very, very classy larnu. Attend Chayanam Nud but class. Yeah, I don't know what they're saying. Is this?
I'm sorry, I can't see them, but then I think I'm not sure.
Are they
Ma'am,
trolling or do they have a question?
no, ma'am. Maybe it may be a mistake. So just leave it,
Oh,
ma'am.
right. Okay. No, so I'm saying, Faiza, that we also have to not paint everyone on the other side with the same brush. We have to listen to some of the arguments being made, because some of them are being made by people who are genuine, who have genuine concerns.
Okay. Yeah, so I was talking more about the Hindutva side, where this whole celebration is coming from.
Yeah,
When
that's all about bullying, and it's just
yeah,
pure simple bullying. There's no other reason for it.
yeah,
And disciplining, bullying and disciplining.
yes. Should we wait? What should we do, Tamannata?
Yeah, I think we can wait for a while.
Okay.
There are very many practices that we follow without thinking through. Some of us think through and adopt them, and there's some that we don't think through. We just adopt them because that's how things are.
Yeah.
And I think that the question is how much of that is cause for concern, and how much of it is okay. And I think Justice Dhulia's position is that if you open these spaces, then it will get resolved democratically, automatically. Then you don't have to remove one kind of uniform and impose your own uniform, which is just very ironical. But I'm also reminded, for instance, Ghazala Wahab, who's a very good journalist, and she writes on security matters. And she has written a very nuanced piece about this. And she says that when she was a young journalist, and she was visiting Kashmir, and she was trying to interview a separatist leader, and the interview was going on well, and then she asked him a question that he didn't like, at which point he became very aggressive, and he said to her that I will not interview with you because you're not wearing a hijab. And he had her leave the room, and he obviously did it because at some point he didn't like her questions, but he used the hijab to get her evicted. So she's saying that hijab is a trope. It's used by different people in very different ways. It's been used by the Islamists. It's been used by the Hindutva lobby. The liberals have a perception of it. The left has a perception of it, and all of them experience it. All of them encounter it in very different ways. And then there are the strong-willed young women like yourselves who wear the hijab of their own agency and free will and volition, and you experience the hijab in a completely different way. But what is happening here is that all of us who don't wear the hijab are imposing our own perceptions of what it is, our own ideas of what it is, on your actions, and judging it according to how we understand it, which is wrong, which is silly. It's for you to reflect, and it's for you to decide. And I think Justice Dhulia understands, and he's saying just open the school gates and let everyone come and give everyone the space to just be themselves and reflect and keep changing if they want to. it's almost 8:30. So let's wait for 2 more minutes and then shall we conclude, because I have some
Yeah,
other engagement at, yeah.
I think that would be okay.
So did you figure out what it is that they want? I've posted those messages in the chat.
Yeah, I think those were the messages for the president. I think we have a question here, but then hello,
Yes, I'm here.
Tamanata, can you read that question out because I can't see it.
Yeah, okay. So, ma'am, it's a question I received. I will read it out. Um, the question is, isn't there a problem with the very ERP doctrine? Even the Supreme Court have questioned its authority to decide on whether a practice is essential to a religion or not. In Sabarimala case, it is not at all a legal issue. It's totally okay for court deciding whether a religious practice is constitutional or not. But it seems not okay in deciding whether a practice in religion is essential or not by the court. So the question is, what is your take on this
So
particular
I
issue?
completely agree. See, first of all, two things. Dr. Rajiv Dhawan, who's this senior advocate and a very well-regarded advocate, he was arguing in favor of in support of the hijab, and he said exactly this to the court. He said that your lordships are judges. You are not Maulvis. You are not pundits, and you shouldn't try and be one, because you will not know. You'll only rely on some kind of secondary commentary, right? You can't read Arabic. You're not trained in theology. Neither can you read Sanskrit. So at best, you'll rely on some kind of commentary. But it should really not be your domain. But also, having said this, ERP was always brought to the court in a very different context. In the context of religious charitable institutions and religious cults. So with religious charitable institutions where they have the right to manage their own institutions, there were certain things that the state wanted to take over, like funding, for instance, or managing of the funds rather. And it was then that the question arose whether if the state takes over management of funds, would that impinge on their religion itself? And it was in that particular context that the question was framed whether management of funds is a religious practice or not, if it's an essential religious practice or not, and whether the state can take over that function from that religious institution. Right now, it's being used in a very different context, and it is completely not applicable in such contexts.
Okay, so I think we'll wind up the session since you're busy also.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
thank you so much,
It was a
ma'am, for this
pleasure.
session.
It was a pleasure.
It was an honor. Thank you so much. And it was a very informative session. Thank you on behalf of GIO. And
Thank you.
thank you to everyone who attended the session. Once again, thank you.
All right. Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you. Thank you very much.